This video contains spoilers for Gone Girl. Pause and click off this video if you do not want to spoil the book or the movie. In the 2014 film adaptation for Gone Girl, Rosamund Pike played a character named Amy Dunn, a woman who had mysteriously gone missing from her home one day. The movie showed the crass media circus that happens around true crime cases, how people's minds can so easily be swayed, and how misinformation and perception can often lead to people believing the worst about those closest to the case, even when evidence of any wrongdoing doesn't exist. The movie starts from the perspective of Nick Dunn, Amy's husband, who is dealing with the fallout from her disappearance and the realization that he is their prime suspect after his affair with a younger woman is made public. From the crime scene being cleaned of blood to Amy's diaries recounting years of abuse and vitriol from Nick, and him hiding his affair, all make the public and police turn on him. However, midway through the movie, the perspective shifts, as the audience is shown Amy, who had gone out of her way to fake her disappearance in an effort to destroy Nick's life for cheating on her. The movie is fantastic, and if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to. Many critique the ending as being unrealistic. How, after everything that happened, everything that she had done, could Amy just come home and pretend that nothing happened? How could she get away with every little crime she had committed without anyone having proof of what she had done? It didn't make any sense. And they would be right, because this happened in the real world, and its ending is far different than its movie counterpart. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading. Today we are going to be talking about the kidnapping of Sherri Papini. This story is still developing as of when I'm writing the script, March 4th, 2022, and I will link any updates in the comments down below. This is also the first video we are posting on a Sunday in addition to our regular Wednesday uploads, and we ask that you leave any recommendations, video suggestions, and whatnot down below as we are rapidly growing. Also, if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to see more. With that out of the way, let us begin. The early life of Sherri Papini is one of the strangest things I have ever had to investigate, because there is very scant amount of information available online, and what is available conflicts wildly. Most of the reports that I have been able to track down are either from her family, given while she was kidnapped, while the others from people who grew up around Sherri and have claimed to know her, as well as her arrest affidavit, which will be covered in a later section. Very little is known officially about Sherri, as she went into hiding with her family due to the onslaught of media attention this case received, which makes this an incredibly hard case to properly research. According to Sherri's family, she was a wholesome and effervescent person. Sherri was the type of person who would give you the shirt off of her back if she knew you needed it. And she was someone who people just fell in love with, almost instantaneously, and she tended to make a lasting impression on every person she had ever been with. One of those people was a man named Case Papini. Keith and Sherri met each other in middle school, when she was in the 8th grade and he was in the 7th. They both had a crush on each other and spent a fair chunk of their time writing each other love letters, encapsulating their preteen love in notes that they would send back and forth. After a bit, Sherri and Keith would be each other's first kiss, but they were young, and after Sherri went to high school, they lost touch. Sherri moved out of Redding, California, and began to find herself. While in high school, Sherri played volleyball and took an interest in theater. She was a great student, and most who knew her thought the world of her. She was one of the people who seemed to just have everything together at a young age, and many saw her as perfect. After high school, she married a man named David Dreyfus in 2006. David was a platoon sergeant with the armed forces, which left Sherri on her own a lot of the time. Because of that, unfortunately, the pair's marriage didn't last long, with them divorcing in June 2008. If Sherri was heartbroken by the dissolution of the marriage, she didn't reflect it outwardly, as she had rekindled her middle school romance with Keith the moment she moved back to Redding. After only a couple of years together, Keith proposed to Sherri, and they began to plan their lives together. According to the blog she kept, Sherri described their love and relationship as being one filled with joy and laughter. Keith and her would prank each other regularly, pouring cups of cold water onto the other while showering, and not being able to brush their teeth at the same time because they would always bust out laughing. They had a joint Facebook account where they posted plenty of photos of themselves and appeared to be the perfect couple. However, how much of that was real remains to be seen. Sherri's life may have appeared to be perfect to those around her, but appearances weren't all that they seemed. When Sherri was 18, her father, Richard Grafe, filed a police report claiming that Sherri had burglarized his home and had vandalized his property. That same year, her sister also told the police that Sherri had kicked in the back door while she wasn't home in an attempt to break in, although it appeared she hadn't been successful at stealing anything. 3 years after these claims from her father and her sister, when Sherri was 21, The cops were called again when Sherri used her father's card at an ATM to withdraw an unknown amount of money from his account. Sherri claimed that she had simply mixed up the cards. However, according to her father, she shouldn't even have had access to his cards at all. Regardless, he dropped the charges. That same year, Sherri's mother also called the police, but this time there was a notable escalation in Sherri's actions. According to the Sacramento Bee, who were able to get the report, Sherri had been having an argument with her mother when she began hurting herself and telling her mother that she was going to claim she was the one who had harmed her. Sherri's mother, in a panic, tried to stop her daughter from further injuring herself, but became more and more alarmed at her behavior, so she called the police for her own protection, wanting it on record that she was not harming her daughter and needing help to de-escalate the situation. Then there is the issue of Sherri's first marriage. Many online sleuths have deduced that this marriage and what Sherri and her ex-husband David have said about it makes little to no sense. While we can't be sure when Sherri and David met, they did apply for a marriage license on January 9th, 2006, when Sherri would have been 24. What is also strange about this is that according to public records, David only lived in the Redding area for 1 month in October of 2006, and the pair were rarely in the same country, much less the same home. A couple months after marrying David, Sherri would meet and rekindle her relationship with Keith, to the point where in December, almost a year after her wedding to Dreyfus, Sherri and Keith would move in together, into a townhouse that, according to Sherri, she had been renting for the past 2 years, which would mean that when she was married to David, they did not live together. She was actively cheating on him with Keith, and by their first Christmas as a married couple, she was already in a serious relationship with another person. Despite this, they stayed married for another 2 years, all while she was actively dating and later engaged to Keith, with her only filing for divorce after becoming engaged. This timeline and the lack of photographic evidence of Sherri and David together have led some to speculate that this relationship was one not built on love, but rather benefits, which is considered a form of larceny. Many believe that Sherri and David had a contract where she would get a stipend per month from him and access to his military health benefits, but it's unclear what he would get out of their arrangement. David has mostly remained out of the spotlight in regards to this case, and prior to March 2022, neither him nor Sherri have ever spoken publicly in regards to their prior marriage and how they fell out, besides to say that the breakup was amicable and they are on good terms. This wasn't all that was off about Sherri, as it was found that a post was made under her maiden name on a racist forum, skinheads.com. The post itself was made in 2003, when Sherri would have been 21, the same time she was threatening her mother, but the post lists a story about something that happened to her when she was in high school. The post is titled, "Being Aware and Taking Pride," and it reads as follows. I grew up in a small country town, Shasta Lake, California. My school was predominantly white. It is a small enough town that everyone pretty much knew each other. I was known as a really good athlete, and my dad had a reputation for being my biggest fan, but also for standing up against Latinos. He even was often kicked out of the stands for getting in fights and defending himself when Latinos would call him a Nazi. Seems that our simply being of German descent was a constant irritant to them. I would get into fights too, having to stick up for myself instead of knuckling under to what the Latino girls said and wanted. I got excellent grades, 3.9 to 4.2, but grew more and more resentful of school and conditions around me. I used to come home in tears because I was getting suspended from school all the time for defending myself against Latinos. The chief problem was that I was drug-free, white, and proud of my blood and heritage. This really irked a group of Latino girls, which would constantly rag and attack me. One night at my volleyball game, my homecoming game, I spotted this gang of Latinos sitting behind my father. As the game was coming to an end, I kept seeing my dad snap around and look behind him, like he kept getting hit by something. Then I caught out of the corner of my eye those little devils throwing ice at my dad and mocking him by raising their hands in the air, as if they were saluting Hitler. After the game was over and we shook hands with the other team, I walked up to the bleachers towards my dad. Just at the moment he turned around, I told the Latinos, nicely actually, to quit their acting up. Then one of them called me Hitler, unleashed a barrage of profanity against me and my dad, and took a swipe at me. That really teed me off. I don't think I've ever been that mad. I lunged back at her, slamming her head between the bleachers and pounding her face. It took 3 full-sized men to pull me off of her. I broke her nose and split her eyebrow after they got me out of the gym. I had to deal with the cops and such. She did not press charges, so I was released to my father's custody. Girls should not fight, which brings me to my point of why girls should not fight. We are just too fragile and break easily. I totally agree with skinheads that girls should not fight. They should stand by their men. But sometimes, I guess, you have to do what is necessary when a skinhead isn't on hand. On the way up to the bleachers, when I had rebuffed the Latinos, I had split my leg open and it was hard for me to walk. But when my dad picked me up from the police department, the only thing he kept saying was, "Cher, I'm proud of you. You did the right thing. Keep on walking. Don't let your leg slow you down. Keep walking." It was a happy feeling to have such support from my dad. 2 weeks later, I was closing the family pizza joint we owned when 2 cars pulled up. I didn't even have to turn around to see who it was. I instinctively knew who it was. 3 Latino guys and 5 girls rushed in and jumped me. I put up a fight, but I was clearly outnumbered and at a disadvantage. The girl whose nose I broke was with them. They kept hollering about how they hated skinheads, how all skinheads should be, quote unquote, burned alive, and how I and my ancestors were supposedly all KKK. I actually laughed in their faces at the inaccuracy of their statements. I mean, they were so dumb that they were actually funny. How dumb can you be? There wasn't even a skinhead anywhere in sight. Then I got knocked to the floor and kicked in the face. I took a deep breath and shook my head in disbelief. Can this really be happening? I thought to myself. Then I thought, is it worth it? Is being white and standing up for myself and my beliefs worth all this pain I'm having to put up with? Then I heard the echo of my dad's voice. You did the right thing. Keep walking, Cher. I'm proud of you. It was that pride that gave me the will I needed, right then and there. I took a deep breath, let out a cuss word, and got right back up, swinging. I don't ever swear like that. Ever. But somehow, the word just slipped out, just as Jesse kicked me in the stomach and the others hit me in the face a few times. Then, before I saw it coming, whack, one of them smashed me in the shin with a 2x4, fracturing my leg. But I kept fighting back so tenaciously that they saw that they couldn't defeat me. Oh my god. So they all suddenly ran out of the door. My house was about 9 or 10 blocks away. I limped the whole way home. I'm not sure how I made it, but I still heard the sound of my dad's voice, "Keep walking, Cher, keep walking." I guess my point is that even though I didn't always understand why my life had to be one constant battle, our family values between myself and my dad carried me through. My dad was always there with me in spirit. Being white is more than just being aware of my skin, but of standing behind skinheads, who were always around in spirit as well, and having pride for my country. Being white is my family, my roots, my way of life. It's always there. There's no denying it. It's nobility. It's strength. And it will always be there to lift me up when I really need my pride, when I need to keep walking. While the post is mostly fictitious and reads like it belongs to the r/that happened subreddit, there are various points in this post that actually do coincide with Sherri's life. Things like her playing volleyball, her getting good grades, and her not being generally accepting of Latinos. When this post was exposed, it caused a wave of confusion. However, both Sherri's husband and ex-husband came to her defense. David, for this part, stated he had been aware of the post while he was married to Sherri, and according to her, it was a cruel prank that was done on her by her high school enemy. He went further to state that Sherri was one of the least racist people he had ever met, so there was no way the post was written by her. Keith, her current husband, also stated that the post was made public as a way to, quote, start a race war, instead of focusing on what was really important, and that was finding out what happened to Sherri, which brings us to the day of November 2nd, 2016. According to Keith, it had been a day like any other. He had gotten up in the morning, gotten dressed, and kissed his wife goodbye before going to work at Best Buy. Sherri had an average day planned for herself and the kids. She had dropped off her 2 kids at daycare, come home, and set about cleaning and getting herself ready for a run, as she was training to do a 5K on Thanksgiving. She texted Keith around afternoon, asking if he would be coming home for lunch, which he replied no to, and then set out on her run, at which point she vanished. When Keith came back home from work, he didn't immediately notice anything was wrong. Sherri's car was still in the driveway, and though the house seemed dark, he fully expected his kids and Sherri to greet him the moment that he entered, as they always did. But when he opened the door, he found the house was empty. He got a sinking feeling. He quickly moved about the house, looking for Sherri and calling out for the kids, but they didn't answer. Trying his best to keep his composure, he called the daycare and was informed that Sherri had never picked up the kids, something that was completely out of the ordinary for her. According to everyone around them, Sherri was incredibly diligent about her daily routine as well as her children, and there was no way she'd simply forget or just leave them there. Keith was beginning to panic at this point. He knew that something was wrong, and when Sherri didn't answer her phone, he decided to utilize the Find My Phone app. According to the app, It appeared that her phone was just about a mile away at their mailbox, and without a moment to spare, he rushed over, hoping that she would be there. But when he got to the spot where it said her phone was, there was nothing. Keith didn't see Sherri, but after looking for a short period of time, he came upon her phone, as well as her headphones, lying on the ground as if they had been delicately placed there. Immediately, he knew something terrible had happened, and after taking a picture of her phone and how he found it, he called the police to state that she was missing.
911, what is your emergency? CHP transfer. Keith is on the line. Hello, can I help you?
Hello? Yeah, I just got home from work, and my wife wasn't there, which is unusual, and my kids should have been there by now from, daycare. So I was like, oh, maybe she went on a walk. I couldn't find her, so I called the daycare to see what time she picked up the kids. The kids were never picked up, so I got freaked out, so I hit, the Find My iPhone app thing, and it said that it showed her phone, at our end of our driveway. We don't have really good service.
Okay.
Not the end of our driveway, but the end of our street. So I just drove down there, and I saw her phone with her headphones because she started running again. And I found her phone, and it's got, hair ripped out of it, in the headphones. So I'm, totally freaking out, thinking, somebody, grabbed her.
Okay, what's your address?
Reading.
Okay, what's your last name?
Yes. Papini, P-A-P-I-N-I.
And your first name?
Keith.
K-E-I-T-H?
Yes.
Okay. Did you go pick up your children?
No, I'm going to call my mom and have her do it.
Okay. What's your wife's name?
I'm going to, knock on every door. Sherri. S-H-E-R-R-I.
And same last name?
Yes.
She white, female?
Yes.
What's her date of birth?
It is June 11th, 1982.
Is her vehicle there? Does she not have a vehicle?
She has a vehicle that's at the house.
Okay, the vehicle is at the house?
She's running.
How? Okay.
Yes, I'm in it right now driving, and I took a picture of her phone on the ground before I picked it up.
Okay, how tall is she?
5'3", 5'4".
How much does she weigh?
100 pounds.
Eye color?
Like a bluish blue.
Okay, hair color?
Blonde.
Do you know what she was wearing? Is there
No
something
idea.
she always wears?
I'm assuming she went running, so
Okay,
probably
is there...
running athletic type clothes.
Okay, there's not an outfit she always wears or anything like that. Does she run with a dog or by herself?
By herself.
Okay. What time were the kids?
She just started running again, and we live in a...
When's the last time? When's the last time you heard from her?
She sent me a text asking me if I was coming home for lunch.
What time was that?
She's got a whole bunch of mixed... give me 1 second. She sent me a text at 10:47 asking me if I was coming home from lunch from work. And I said, sorry, long day. And that was the last. Never spoke to her on the phone, never any other contact.
Okay, and what time are the kids supposed to be picked up?
Way before 5:30. She usually goes at 4:45.
Okay.
4:30, 4:45.
Okay, are you headed back to the house, or where are you at right now?
I'm at the end of the driveway where I'm at the Old Oregon Trail and Sunrise where they meet, because that's right where I found her phone on the ground. You're telling me that something happened to her is the way I'm looking at it. Then there was hair in the headphones. It got ripped off or they grabbed it.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Okay, I'm sorry. I know you're trying to keep me calm, but obviously.
Yeah. What kind of vehicle are you in?
I'm in a black Kia Optima. Oh my God.
Okay.
And we live down kind of a sketchy street, so I definitely, I don't know if I'm allowed to knock on everybody's door, but I will if I'm allowed to do that.
Well, let's just have the officers contact you so they can start, processing everything, figure out what's going on, okay? And I understand you're freaking out a little bit. We want to make sure we get your kids, make sure they're okay.
Yeah, I'm gonna call my mom and have her.
Yeah, they've been stuck at your phone number.
Yes. you want me to wait right here for somebody, or?
If you want to head back to your residence so they can contact you there, and in case she does return.
Okay.
Okay. We'll have them contact
Okay.
you at your residence. Call us back if anything changes, all right?
All right, so they're going to call the number you just took down, the 355?
They'll probably call you when they're on their way, and they're going to come out in person.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Immediately, this kidnapping case sparked wide media attention across the United States. People showed up in droves to aid in the search effort, with the police leading a grid search around the family home and where the phone was found. Sherri's pictures and missing posters were plastered everywhere, along with pictures of what people believed she had been wearing at the time. This case had a number of factors going for it. When it came down to the attention it received from the media, Sherri was an active, beautiful woman who lived a very comfortable life with her loving husband. She was an upstanding citizen who seemed to vanish into thin air, and just before Thanksgiving. These factors led to many becoming fearful, because if it could happen to a nice, normal person who was just out for a run in broad daylight, it could happen to anyone. But from the moment the police were on the case, they felt as if something didn't feel right. They first took note of just how perfectly staged Sherri's phone seemed to be. In most cases of abduction, a person's phone will either be thrown by the abductor while leaving the scene, or dropped during the ambush by the abductee. But from how delicately placed it was, it felt like it had been left there by someone who was coming back, as if someone just pulled off their headphones, put the phone down, and walked away. But when the investigators spoke to the family, they were adamant that Sherri would never have willingly left her family. She loved Keith and loved her kids, and if she were going to leave, she would have no doubt brought them with her. All conversations around the possibility that Sherri had left willingly, that she just decided to get up and go, were completely rebuffed. It was clear that if the investigators even broached the topic to anyone in Sherri's life, they would get agitated. The cops realized that if they wanted to continue to get the family's cooperation, they would have to tread lightly. They also knew that if Sherri had in fact run away on her own, that if she was villainized in the media, it would be less likely that she would be found. It was imperative that they investigate that possibility as quietly as possible, which led them to telling multiple press outlets that while they didn't rule out a potential runaway situation, they also had no reason to not believe that she hadn't been abducted. When the idea that she had willingly left was shelved, the cops then turned their attention to Keith. In most cases where a person is kidnapped and held against their will, it tends to be that person's spouse. And being that he had found the phone so neatly on the ground, the cops started questioning him. They brought Keith in for multiple interrogations going over Sherri and his home life, her past relationships, and everything, in order to see if there were any cracks in the family that would cause him to break. On the 9th of November, he completed a polygraph test and passed with flying colors, and with that, Keith was ruled out completely. Shortly after he was ruled out, a tip was called in, with a woman stating that she had seen a woman at a gas station who had matched Sherri's description. The woman who matched Sherri's description had been traveling with a man, and while she was alone, the other woman approached her and asked her if she was Sherri. According to the woman who had called in the tip, the blonde had acted evasively and seemed more nervous than anything, and she truly believed that she had spoken with Sherri. However, after looking further into it, the cops determined that the woman who she saw wasn't Sherri, and had nothing to do with the case, which left the police with virtually nothing. Sherri had been taken without a trace. Her family was adamant that she wouldn't do this to herself, that she hadn't had any affairs or anything that would cause her to leave, and Keith had an alibi. There was no camera footage, and the cops had next to nothing to go off of. As November rolled on, it was becoming clear that the investigation wasn't going well, but Keith wasn't about to give up. Far from it, in fact. He began to make regular appearances on the news and in the media, striving to keep her face and her story in the public consciousness. But it seemed like every time he would be in front of the media, more and more people would begin to distrust his story. Keith told the press that Sherri had been on a jog when she was taken, which was part of her regular routine. However, neighbors stated that Sherri never ran and wasn't super athletic. Keith spoke about how Sherri was always with the kids and spent the majority of her days with them as a stay-at-home mother, but people found it odd that she had put them in a daycare center despite not having a job. As the days went on, people kept finding small holes in their story, but it felt as if the family was going through enough without the added stress of explaining small facets of their life to them. As the investigation started to falter and leads stopped pouring in, Keith created his own GoFundMe in order to pay for 2 private investigators to look into the disappearance and try to find where his wife was. He did multiple media interviews, saying that while the police were doing all they could, it was his job as her husband to make sure no stone was left unturned, and if that meant paying other people to investigate, he was willing to do it. The GoFundMe quickly racked up $49,000 from the public, hoping that against all odds, they would be able to bring Sherri back. The continued media blitz got the attention of a man who to this day remains anonymous. This man was a multi-millionaire who had become fascinated by the case and wanted to help the family bring Sherri home. Instead of contacting the family, getting a hold of the police, or even making a statement anonymously to the news that would be offering a reward for Sherri's safe return, this donor contacted Cameron Gamble, a self-professed professional hostage negotiator. Cameron Gamble and the multimillionaire who hired him are steeped in controversy and mystery, and as the days go on and more is revealed about the FBI investigation into this case, no doubt we will learn more about these two individuals, if they are indeed two separate individuals. Despite Cameron saying that he is a professional hostage negotiator and he has successfully enabled the return of thousands of hostages from around the world, proof of this statement doesn't exist anywhere that we could find. The majority of his resume is filled with blatant lies. Gamble enlisted in the Air Force in 2002, but was discharged only 3 years later in 2005. He consistently cites his military training as what qualifies him to help in hostage negotiations. However, when in the Air Force, he worked as a vehicle operations apprentice, which has nothing to do with hostages, negotiations, or anything regarding missing persons. On the websites he uses to get clients for his paid anti-abduction training program that he markets to young women, he often cites his survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training that he took part in the military. That being said, the only confirmed training he took that even slightly resembles that would be his combat survival training, which every member of the Air Force, military, and Navy do. He goes further to claim that he trained Special Forces soldiers due to his own expertise, but just as before, no proof of this exists. And given that he was only in the Air Force for 3 years, working as a mechanic, chances are proof is not going to be found. After leaving the Air Force, Gamble created 2 separate businesses, both based around his military expertise. The first was Catalyst Advanced Training Group, which was essentially a course that he hoped to sell to law enforcement. The course was meant to teach law enforcement officials how to properly conduct successful interrogations without resorting to torture. He went as far as to state that the course he made had been accredited by the Department of Criminal Justice Services, which does not and has never existed. This course seemingly did not sell well, as most professional interrogators in the FBI and police departments weren't using torture to begin with. It also didn't help that he was marketing this course to investigators who would be able to look into his background before hiring him and see that he had no grounds to teach anything. His other business was Project Taken, which was an anti-abduction training program. Project Taken was supposed to be a non-profit where he would teach people how to protect themselves from being kidnapped, abducted, sex trafficked, and more. In order to market his program, he created various short films like this one. Like before, Gamble had no qualifications to teach anyone how to protect themselves from anything, and most who encountered his businesses were able to see right through his scam, as both Catalyst Apprentice Training Group and Project Taken were unsuccessful, leading him to declaring bankruptcy in 2012. It's because of his absolute, utter lack of any credentials that it becomes unlikely that anyone, much less a multimillionaire wanting to sincerely help a family in crisis, hired him to help find Sherri. It is much more likely, due to the fact that no one, save Gamble, knows who this mysterious donor is, that they do not in fact exist. And it was just Gamble, using this incredibly publicized story to gain media attention for his various projects. Based on how often Gamble lied about his life in order to make money, he is definitely not above using somebody else's tragedy to his benefit. After about a week of Sherri being missing, Gamble reached out to the Papinis and offered his help. He stated that he had been hired by an anonymous multimillionaire who was willing to put up $50,000 of their own money as a sort of ransom for Sherri. He told Keith that he had years of experience, and he had spent his entire life saving young men and women who had been taken just like Sherri, and that he was willing to work for free to help them get her back. Keith immediately agreed to work with him, wanting above all else Sherri to come home.
My name is Cameron Gamble, and I'm an international kidnap and ransom consultant. I've been retained by an individual who wishes to remain anonymous, an individual who has come forward to offer a cash reward for a ransom for Sherri Papini's return back to her family. I have looked at this case thoroughly. I've spoken to the husband, Keith, and I am 100% convinced this is an abduction case. This is not a kidnap for ransom. We are trying to turn it into that. I don't know your motive. I don't know who you are, where you're going, where you're from. I don't care. I simply care about getting Sherri back. Our objective is to reach out to you and have you take advantage of this one-time opportunity to take the cash for Sherri's return. This offer is off the table in less than 100 hours. We're not working with the FBI. We are not working with local law enforcement. We don't care about justice. We simply care about Sherri's safe return. 530-351-2748 is the number you can call on this phone, and we will work out the agreement to get Sherri back. It does not matter if it's night or day. It does not matter who you are. I simply care about getting Sherri back. Take advantage of this opportunity. You can also go to sherripapini.com and look at the telephone number there and call me. Let's talk.
Cameron then made a video. The video was Cameron sitting in front of a white wall, stating that he was now speaking on behalf of an anonymous donor who was offering $50,000 for safe return of Sherri, no questions asked. He also stated that this offer had a time limit of only a few days, wherein he would then leave the Shasta area, and the money would be off the table. The video went viral, with people thinking it was an odd publicity stunt. The police, FBI, and anyone who had prior hostage negotiating experience quickly blasted Gamble, saying that this was an ineffectual way to get results. But Gamble was steadfast. He believed that within the month, they would be getting Sherri back. When the time ran out on Cameron's video and the anonymous donor was set to remove the reward, he made a second video, essentially taunting the kidnappers and saying that because there is now an open reward for Sherri's return and that the $50,000 reward had been up to a number that would make it so tempting that even, quote, the kidnappers' mothers would turn them in.
It is now 5 a.m. on November 23rd, and the ransom money for Sherri Papini is officially off the table for the individuals who abducted her. I'm sorry you didn't take advantage of this opportunity when you had the chance. That was your safest and your best option aside from just letting her go, which you can still do. As I stated in the media, the world has been looking for Sherri Papini, and now the world is going to be looking for you, whoever you are. That's not a threat. That's not something I even control. It's just a known fact when things are elevated to this level. I've said from the beginning that justice has not been mine to bring you. I was retained for one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to find a way for Sherri to come home. But now I want to talk to everybody else out there. Everybody watching this video and everyone listening. You know, the anonymous donor who came forward with the ransom money has been completely overwhelmed by how the media shared our unconventional approach to finding Sherri's abductors, and overwhelmed by the incredible response from the community. It was you, the community, that took this issue serious by viewing and sharing our video over 100,000 times in just a few days. Because of your efforts, we have no doubt that those who have Sherri saw our offer. So now what? What do we do? Well, there's an offer that's still on the table. The entire ransom money is going to be combined with the $50,000 reward that was previously posted for tips leading to Sherri's whereabouts. That's a six-figure reward, and it will be paid confidentially and in cash immediately if you help us to Sherri. No one will know who you are. No one's going to ask any questions. We don't care if you're a convicted felon, if you're a person with a warrant out for your arrest, or a drug addict. We don't care about your name or where you're from. No one will ask you any questions about your identity. And there are no cops involved. They've not been involved from the beginning with us. There are no strings attached to this cash offer. You lead us to Sherri, and we give you more cash than you can spend. The anonymous donor has already left the Redding area to be with his family for Thanksgiving, but he's made the funds readily accessible so that we can make an offer to the person who's willing to help us. We're not interested in leads from dreams or visions or people with special gifts. We only want to hear from the person who absolutely knows who took Sherri or where she is. I have no doubt that somebody other than the abductors knows who took Sherri. Whoever you are, do the right thing. Better your life by taking the cash, and better the Papini family's life by leading them to Sherri. You know, I can't tell you what's going to happen in the days ahead, but I do know that a family and a community are outraged by this situation. And when people unite for a greater good, they're unstoppable. One way or another, all the unknowns will be made known. And this family and this community will unite. And closure will be given. The number remains the same. 530-351-2748.
Cameron all but threatened the supposed kidnappers and told them the jig was up, which again, law enforcement who had worked with kidnapping and hostage cases heavily criticized, agitating someone who it believed to be dangerous, making them feel as if the walls were closing in, and that there is no way out is a surefire way to get them to make irrational, dangerous moves. But Cameron didn't care. His videos were going viral, and he registered his own website, CameronGamble.com, in order to profit.
Let's bring in Cameron Gamble, a self-described kidnap and ransom consultant. Tell us, first of all, how you got involved in this case.
Yeah, I was actually, I was out of town most of the time while Sherri was in captivity, but I was brought in by an individual who knew me in the community for speaking on specifically human trafficking a few years prior to this. She had called and asked, she was a mutual friend of the family, and asked if I could come in and just consult with the family and just kind of give my opinion as to what I thought had taken place.
I've covered far too many of these cases, and you really do get to a point you see with the families where they're willing to try anything. And, you know, they tried various non-traditional approaches. Your name came up. This is what Sherri's husband, Keith, said about all that.
There was no idea or thought that if I think could work, that I was not going to try.
So what was your approach going to be? And did you find that Keith and that family members were skeptical that it could work?
You know, I really only talked to Keith about it. I didn't really speak to any of the other family members. And Keith, at that point, like he just said in the video, he was absolutely willing to try anything. And we felt like this could work, because when you get to that point of desperation, you do try to do whatever might possibly work, and it did work out. But Keith was all for it at the very beginning. As a matter of fact, it was Keith who brought the kidnap for ransom idea to me via the individual who came forward with all the money.
Now, no money ever exchanged hands, correct?
That is correct.
So why do you think that this was at least part of the reason that she was released?
Well, if you just look at the timeline on this, there's a couple things going on here. One, I was the only one willing to go public and put my reputation on the line and call it for what I believed it was, which was an abduction. Alongside the family, they believed it was as well. So we released the first video. It goes viral on both on a social media side as well as just the media outlet. And then that was our point, was to get it to go viral, to show that there's an option here for these abductors. And then when the ransom wasn't taken up on, we gave them another option, and that was just let her go. You can just walk away from this. And if you don't, just so you're aware, there's a bounty now. And as I stated in the video, that's not something I control. It's not a threat. But we are willing to take all this ransom money and add it to the pot for those who can bring us to you, whoever you are. And then you have less than 24 hours later, these abductors just let her go.
Keith, Sherri Papini's husband, was obviously distraught during the time his wife was missing. I just want to play a little more of what he had to say to ABC.
He jumped up on the couch with me, and he knew something was up. And he said, "Dad, you can tell me anything." For a little 4-year-old to say that, I wasn't prepared for that. So I just said, "Son, you know, Mommy went running, and she didn't come home, and we're all looking for her right now." I don't think I ever lost hope, but it was eating away at me.
I had read some of the things, including that critics said you might be taking advantage of the family's grief. I wonder, how much pushback did you get, and did you ever waver on your thought that this could possibly move things in the right direction?
You know, there was definitely some pushback initially. It was obviously from the law enforcement side. They felt the approach was unconventional. My response was, when you're looking at a situation like this, the entire thing's unconventional, so a linear approach won't work. And obviously now the pushback is that I took advantage of a family. I'm not sure how. I was retained by, not the family, but by the anonymous donor for $1. That dollar, when I bought the ransom phone, was donated to St. Jude's Children's Hospital. So there was no profiteering in this. And I'll tell you, I was reluctant to step into this. My wife had asked me multiple times, "Are you willing to do this, and do you want to offer your support?" And I said, "Not unless I'm asked." And it wasn't until I was asked that, even at that point, I said, "Okay, how can I get involved and offer some hope to Keith?" And it was at that point we had this conversation about what to do next.
Despite how terrible, uninformed, and dangerous his actions were, somehow, they seemed to work, because on Thanksgiving morning, November 24th, 2016, Sherri was found alive. Sherri was found early Thanksgiving morning before the sun had risen. She had been bound and chained in a vehicle with a bag over her head, when suddenly her captor pushed her out of the car onto a street. Sherri then took the bag off of her head and realized she was outside for the first time in days. Sherri had no idea where she was and began running around looking for help. She ran towards what looked to be a house, but thought it looked uninviting, so she ran away. She then ran to a church and banged on the doors, trying to get someone's attention, but there was no one inside. She then ran onto the freeway, hoping that she would be able to get someone's attention. Multiple people saw her, including one woman who claimed that Sherri had almost jumped in front of the car, trying to get her to stop. The woman drove past, fearing that Sherri could have been dangerous. But once she was further up the road, she stopped her car and called the police, letting them know there was a woman on the freeway who looked panicked. A trucker also saw Sherri and called the police as well, verifying that she was there. The cops responded immediately, and Sherri was taken to the hospital in order to receive treatment. She had lost 15 pounds in the time she had been gone, bringing her down to around 85 pounds. Her long blonde hair had been cut haphazardly, and when she was picked up, she still had chains on her that needed to be cut off. She was wearing entirely different clothes than the ones she had been last seen in, except for her underwear, which had an unknown male's DNA on it. Her body was completely bruised, with multiple bruises in various stages of healing, layers on top of each other, showing that she had been beaten for days. And most frightening of all, she had been branded on her arm. Sherri was picked up and taken to the hospital early morning, and the cops immediately called Keith, informing him of her return. Keith, for some reason, was already awake, and according to him, was shaving when he got the call. He was shocked at her appearance when they were reunited, no longer seeing the vibrant, happy, beautiful woman she had always been, but an emaciated, frail stranger who had just gone through the worst thing imaginable. That day, the community had already planned to do a balloon release at the Papini home in order to keep the spirits up when it came to the situation, and let Sherri know, wherever she was, that they were looking for her. But before the balloons were released, she was found, and nothing would be the same again. When Sherri was returned, the police tried to speak to her about what she had gone through, but she was incredibly resistant to have anything to do with law enforcement. She stated that her abductors had alluded to law enforcement being directly involved with her kidnapping, and that while she was being held captive, they read her articles that stated that she had left voluntarily, which upset her. She stated that the kidnapper laughed at her and said, "No one believes you. Everyone thinks you ran away, so no one believes you. Guess what? The buyer's a cop. They are never going to find you," alluding to the fact that she would be sold into some kind of slavery. She then got upset when she noticed that the police were writing down her statements because she didn't want to speak to them, despite speaking to them. After she had recovered a bit, she came back and spoke to the investigators and told them how she had been kidnapped. While she was out on a run, a dark-colored SUV containing 2 Hispanic women drove past her, then stopped and reversed towards her, asking her for help. Sherri then approached the vehicle, and one of the women showed her a gun and told her to put the phone down, which Sherri did, accounting for how staged the phone on the ground appeared to be. They told her to get into the car, and that they didn't want to kill her, but they would if they had to. With that, Sherri got into the vehicle. Once inside, they wrapped something around her face, tased her, and then stripped her of all of her clothes, and then stated that she kept falling asleep, and she didn't remember anything besides the car now smelling like sewage. She went on to describe her 2 abductors in detail. As mentioned, they were 2 Hispanic women, one older and one younger. The older one was said to be really mean, while the young one seemed reluctantly involved, as if they were being forced into it. They both wore face masks and spoke primarily in Spanish, but Sherri was still able to get enough of a good look at them to provide a description to a sketch artist. According to her, the older one who was in charge was tall and fat, had long, dark hair with gray in it, and spoke in a raspy voice. The younger one had long brown curly hair and was a great deal shorter than the older one. Eventually, they brought Sherri to a small home where they kept her primarily in a closet. They had her chained to a metal pole that was located in the closet itself, but gave her enough slack to move around the closet and, in her own words, stay alive. She recalled that she would do yoga and Pilates at times, and when they provided her a bucket to do her business in, she asked if they could also get kitty litter as well, which they did. Sherri tried to get information as to why she was being held from them, and offered to clean and cook in order to get on their good side. They would rebuff any help from her, and keep her in the closet. When asked for further details, Sherri went on and stated that the woman would play loud, annoying Mexican music all the time, and they would watch TV. She noted that the home was extremely cold, and they would put the fireplace on every night to combat this. Luckily, there had been no sexual abuse while she was in captivity, but there was physical abuse. Sherri stated that she was regularly hit by the old woman, but things weren't that bad until she attempted to run away. She didn't say how she managed to get out, but she tried to escape and the woman brought her back in, struck her multiple times on the back, tied her to a table, and then branded her. They told her they did this because her buyer specifically liked his girls branded, and that was what he was into. When asked further about her buyer, Sherri stated she didn't know anything about him because they spoke about him in Spanish, but she did hear things like medicine, traffic cameras, delivery date, and the word gamble. As far as how she was released, Sherri had very little idea. She said that the two women began to fight, with the younger woman advocating for Sherri because she feared she needed medicine. The older one fought back, and then she heard a gunshot. Afterward, the younger one seemed to leave, and Sherri believes that she was left alone in the house. She had passed out for a while, then when she woke up, she was in a car with a bag over her head, and the younger one was telling her to get out. She couldn't account for many things, like how her hair was cut, how male DNA was found on her when she had only been held by women. And as the FBI continued their investigation and continued to speak to her, they would find more things that didn't make sense. Sherri began to change the story in small, important ways. And as more time went on, the more they began to feel as if Sherri was lying. On March 3, 2022, Sherri Papini was arrested for faking her kidnapping and for fraud, and the arrest affidavit was released to the public, which detailed the tremendous amount of lies that Sherri had told not only throughout the case, but throughout her life. Sherri had been portrayed as this all-American girl with a beautiful home and a loving family that she wouldn't leave for anything, but absolutely none of that was true. And all of this came to light because of a familial DNA search. For those of you who are unaware, investigators have been using services like 23andMe in order to solve cold cases that were previously deemed unsolvable because of genetic markers and specifics of familial DNA. If you committed a crime and your sister sent her DNA into one of these services, you could be linked to said crime. This is the process that was used to solve the Golden State Killer case, and it's one of the biggest breakthroughs in modern crime investigation. When Sherri was found, she was wearing all new clothing, save for her underwear, which was tested and found to have her DNA on it, as well as an unknown male's DNA. But who this man was remained a mystery, as Sherri was certain that she only came into contact with the two women who had held her prisoner. For years, the investigation struggled to place this DNA with anyone until 2022, when it was run through a familial DNA system and came back as being a relative of the unknown male's DNA. A quick investigation showed that this person had only two biological sons, one of whom the investigation had known to be an ex-boyfriend of Sherri's named James Reyes. Sherri had not been kidnapped and held by two Latina women for no reason. Rather, she had convinced her high school ex-boyfriend that her husband was abusive, that she was in danger, and only he could save her. It was the same ruse she had done countless other times in her life, but for whatever reason, this time, she wanted to make it look like a kidnapping. When the FBI spoke to James, he almost immediately folded and admitted everything. He informed them that he had been in the midst of cleaning his home one day when he stumbled upon some of Sherri's old things from when they were dating. Enough time had passed that he could send the items back with no issue. Shortly after sending her the items, Sherri reached out and quickly told him about how horrible her life was. She stated that Keith would regularly beat and rape her, and that she lived in fear of him. She went further to explain that she had reported Keith's abuse to the police, but no one would listen to her. She went further to tell him that she had a hidden bank account that she was putting money away in so she could leave him, but he had become suspicious of her, and she feared that by the time she had saved enough money, he would have killed her. In order to continue talking without Keith becoming suspicious, Sherri set up a joint AOL email for them to use. She stated that Keith often went through her phone and email, and that this was the only way they could talk without risking her life. James and her also bought burner phones, something that was integral to her planning her own disappearance. Sherri told James to have a friend rent a car for him so he could make the 8-hour drive to Redding from his apartment in Costa Mesa. She sent him a care package with the location he was to wait for her at, and asked him to pick her up a Starbucks for their ride back. He did as he was told, and on November 2nd, she ran to the location her phone had been found at, put it neatly on the ground, and jumped into the car with him, laying in the back seat for the entire 8-hour ride back. When they got back to his apartment, Sherri got to work on phase 2 of the plan. It didn't seem like she wanted to try to integrate back into society or contact her family to let them know she was safe, but was leaving Keith. Instead, she stayed inside his residence, asking him to board up the windows of his room so that no one would look inside and see her. Their relationship was also not physical, with him choosing to sleep on the couch as she slept in his bed. During the 20-day period, James began to notice that Sherri was not eating enough and purposely trying to lose weight. He described seeing her eating half a banana one day and refusing to eat anything else, which he thought was odd, given that she was already very thin. She also began to hurt herself, purposely punching her arms and legs in order to make it appear as if she'd been beaten. Sherri also asked James if he would help her with this task, which he outright refused to do. He said that there were times where Sherri would ask him to throw something at her, and he would oblige. But he never took part in any of the beatings she did to herself. However, he was the one to brand her. According to James, Sherri got the idea for him to brand her early on and asked him to pick up a wood-burning tool from Hobby Lobby. Sherri told him the phrase that she wanted to be branded on her as it was meaningful to her. In Sherri's eyes, this branding was more or less kind of a tattoo. According to James, he thought he was genuinely helping his ex-girlfriend out. She had spent months telling him about the insane amount of abuse she was being put through at home and how her husband was a psychopath who wanted her dead. He thought that by helping her, he was saving her life. Until she decided to go back to him and state that she had been kidnapped and held against her will. He realized he had been lied to. At this point, he was afraid to come forward. His story, unlike Sherri's, had a mountain of evidence confirming it to be true, from their shared email account, the proof of the calls they made on both of their burner phones, and his work schedule slotting perfectly into the times when she was taken and returned. There were no holes in James's story, but there was so much more about Sherri that they were about to find out. When Sherri had originally gone missing and her cell phone had been collected, it was found that Sherri had 2 numbers under the names of women that actually belonged to men who Sherri was engaging in extramarital activities with. The first man lived in Michigan, and he and Sherri had been carrying on an affair for years. They had spent numerous weekends away with each other, and her phone showed that the two had plans to meet up in November. When the investigators looked more closely into him, they found that this man had actually flown out to California before Sherri's disappearance, and the day after she was reported missing, flew back to Michigan. The police, thinking that Sherri had run away with this man willingly, flew out to Michigan, where he was questioned, only to find that he hadn't met up with her at all, despite what they had said to each other. The next man was someone who had met Sherri in the early 2000s, when she would have been in her late teens to early 20s. They had volunteered together at a youth program, and this man, despite engaging in sexual conversations with Sherri on and off for years, described her as an incredibly scary person who was, quote-unquote, attention hungry, and had fabricated stories about being the victim of abuse at the hands of her family, father, and himself, after they broke up, which is something we know happened, given the multiple police reports against her made during that time frame. After hearing this, the investigators reached out to the man who was in charge of the youth program, and he likewise confirmed that Sherri had a tendency to lie for attention. According to him, Sherri was good at creating different realities for people so that they would see what she wanted them to see, which got her really good attention.
He dated Sherri Papini and says he knows firsthand that she's a world-class fantasist.
She's a compulsive liar. She would, not talk to you for 3 or 4 days, and then all of a sudden there'd be some fantastical story about what happened. In retrospect, sure, tons of red flags, right? But she was a counselor that was going out with a 15-year-old kid.
Now 35, the professor of communications says Sherri's lies were never ending. For example, she kept insisting she was a skilled surfer.
I surfed all the time when I was 15, 16 years old. It's something that I really enjoyed doing, and she told me that she surfed as well. There was always an excuse as to why she couldn't go surf, and she had to have her surfboard that was at her house but didn't have any pictures.
He says there was also a mystery medical condition.
She was faking a heart condition at one point, and eventually, not only me, but a bunch of people figured out that that was not true.
What did you think when you heard that Sherri Papini was kidnapped?
I was like, there's no way. She's fine. I promise you she's fine. There's just no chance that she got kidnapped. I want to stop people thinking that I am the person that hit her or helped her or had any contact with her.
Sherri.
After learning about Sherri's serial cheating on her husband and her proclivity to lie about abuse, they turned to Sherri's former husband, David Dreyfus. As previously mentioned, David had never spoken up about Sherri, besides to say their marriage ended amicably, and that they were still friends, but many forums dedicated to this case and web sleuths had deduced that their marriage had been fraudulent. When the investigation turned to him, he was brought in for questioning by the FBI. David himself admitted as much. According to the affidavit, David stated that Sherri had married him in order to get medical insurance because she had a heart murmur. He confirmed that they were married in 2006, before he was deployed, and that they had never lived together. After he returned from deployment, Sherri told him that she wanted a divorce because she had met someone else, which he was all right with. He also went as far as to confirm that Sherri had stated multiple times that her family had abused her growing up, and that she said the same about David when they divorced. They also found out that this was not the first time that Sherri had seemingly gone missing, as Sherri had a habit of running away from home when she was younger, including a time where she, at age 16, had run away to Southern California in order to stay with some friends. With the added information that Sherri had run away from home multiple times and had accused various people of abuse falsely, it became clear that faking a kidnapping and blaming two fictional Hispanic women would be just up Sherri's alley. It also didn't help that she had previously written the post on skinheads.com about how she disliked Hispanic men and women, and how they previously assaulted her in high school, something that she, when asked about it, was now saying she had no memory of. In 2020, before Sherri was arrested, she was brought into another interrogation with the FBI, this time to be given the opportunity to come clean about what had happened. They showed her pictures of her ex-boyfriend's apartment, showed her his closet, and asked to verify if that was the place where she was held. Sherri said she didn't know, and she didn't think it was. She was then shown a lineup of Hispanic women, and asked if any of them are the people who kidnapped her, and she again said no. It was then that they informed her that the reason they were showing her these pictures was because they had found the place she was held, and had gotten a confession from the family who was present when she was held, and that they had evidence. Sherri, for what it's worth, did her best to act shocked, and then asked to be left alone with her husband for a moment to speak. When the investigators came back, Sherri told them that she didn't want to find the women who did this to her, because despite being beaten, tased, starved, and chained, that woman was the reason she was able to get to see her kids every day. It was then that the investigators dropped the hammer on her and said, "We agree, but we're not going to find her," and went on to explain that they had identified the DNA that was left on her underwear and found that it belonged to her ex-boyfriend, and had proof that she hadn't been abducted, but used a burner phone and an AOL account to plan her own disappearance, to which she simply responded no. She continued to deny that she had taken part in anything that had happened to her, and even went so far as to state that she and James hadn't spoken to each other since before she was married, that is, until her husband was asked to leave the room, in which she said that they did talk a little bit before her abduction, and that she had talked to a couple of other guys when she was out of town for work. Men that she, quote, shouldn't have spoken to. Past that, she refused to admit to any part of planning her own abduction, and remained completely firm in the stance that she had been kidnapped by two Hispanic women, despite there being concrete evidence that that could not have happened. At the time of writing, this is still a developing case, and if needed, we will make a follow-up. After the affidavit was published and Sherri was arrested, her family put out the following statement, condemning the police and declaring Sherri's innocence. "We love Sherri and are appalled by the way in which law enforcement ambushed her this afternoon in a dramatic and unnecessary manner in front of her children. If requested, Sherri would have fully complied and come to the police station as she has done multiple times before, where this could have been handled in a more appropriate way. Sherri and Keith have cooperated with law enforcement's requests despite repeated attempts to unnecessarily pit them against each other. We are confused by several aspects of the charges and hope to get clarification in the coming days. This is one of the rare true crime cases where, although no one is hurt, it still manages to get under one's skin. Sherri spent her entire life lying in order to get some kind of external validation from others. Cameron Gamble tried to use the case of a missing person to gain fame and notoriety, and Sherri falsely accused Hispanic women of a crime that caused women in her area to be targeted by police and citizens, all just for attention. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any suggestions as to cases we should cover, leave some in the comments below, and remember, stay safe.